Hello, everybody. I'm ZKast here, and I'm back for another episode of another ZKast episode here. As always, these are done in partnership with eWeek as part of their eSpeak series, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Chris Preimesberger. Chris, why don't you say hello to everybody?
Hello, Zeus, and hello, everybody.
Yeah, well, this was a interesting week. You know, we had Cisco Earnings this week, and it's an interesting week for Cisco to announce just because we had all the craziness in the market with Bitcoin and things like that. But that's, I guess, neither here nor there for Cisco. Cisco actually put up some decent numbers. Its third quarter fiscal revenue came in about $230 million over street expectations, which is about 6.8% growth. It beat non-GAAP EPS by a penny, as it has actually. That seems to be the Cisco story. They always seem to beat by a penny. I think some of the, the numbers aside, they did guide to okay revenue. They upped their guidance actually a little bit from what the street was expecting for revenue next quarter. EPS was soft, and that had a lot to do with the chip shortage that we've talked about before, right? So it's squeezing margins. It's I think Cisco may have to raise some prices. They alluded to that, although Chuck Robbins, their CEO, didn't actually say where he was going to. I like to talk about Cisco's earnings because they're such a bellwether for the industry. And I think there was some interesting takeaways from that. The first is that companies are planning to head back to work soon. If you look at the growth in Cisco, they had 10% order growth, which they haven't had in almost a decade, right? So that's pretty phenomenal for a company that size. If you look from a product category, their infrastructure platforms were up 6%. Management noted that there was strength in Wi-Fi as well, including Meraki from refresh opportunities. There was strength in routing from refresh opportunities. Security continues to rip at Cisco. It was up 13% year over year with strength coming from Umbrella and Duo. And lastly, the app revenue was up 5%, fueled by double-digit growth from WebEx. And so what that tells me is that companies are buying infrastructure today, prepping for workers to come back to the office. And so I think we're, hooray, we're finally coming out of this where we're never going to see each other again. Another really interesting data point that they talked about was their software business is at a $14 billion run rate. And I looked at the other software companies. That actually makes them the fifth largest software company in the industry. Only Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle, and SAP are bigger. They're bigger than Workday. They're bigger than Citrix. They're bigger than VMware as far as just software revenue goes. And, that's a pretty interesting stat. And so, 5 years ago, Cisco was a primarily hardware-oriented company. Chuck Robbins came in. He said software and subscriptions were the thing to do, and they've done that, and they've made that transition. So
Cisco has really diversified. There was a time when it was really treading water, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Yes, its infrastructure was everywhere, and yes, it was working, and yes, it had loyal clients, but it needed to find new businesses to run, and it certainly has done that. And Chuck Robbins has diversified the company. I think John Chambers started that in motion, but I think Chuck has really picked it up. It's very impressive to see what they've done. And like you say, in software, they're a major player in security now. 7 years ago, they were not a major player in security. They are now. And like you said, their regular businesses, their basic businesses are very healthy. And what they've added has all added to the bottom line for the entire company. It's been very impressive. And it is a bellwether for the rest of the IT world. Where Cisco goes, other people follow. And having almost a 7% rise in revenue, that's pretty impressive in this pandemic year.
Yeah, especially for a company that size. And you're right on the security side. I think 7 years ago, they sold a lot of security products, but they were selling network security things to network buyers. Today, they're selling security things to security buyers, and that's a big difference. They're a major security vendor. They've also, they took it in the chin a little bit at the beginning of the pandemic from Zoom and some of the other collaboration vendors, but that WebEx business has come roaring back. They have driven, tons of innovation into that product. It's much easier to use. They've completely revamped the devices, and so it's nice to see, that working again. And I think, the other takeaway I have is if you look at their gross margins, Chris, at 66% right now. I remember maybe 10 years ago, it was their gross margins for one quarter dipped below 60%, and Wall Street acted like the sky was falling. And I think what this shows to me, and trust me, I think that this thesis has been out there that networking would become commoditized because of the age of the longevity of that product line, right? Like everything over time gets commoditized. But I think what Cisco has proved is that if you continue to drive innovation into products, customers will pay a premium for it, right? And they actually did that with their servers when they first entered the server market. So, there's still lots of innovation to be done in the network. And so that's, it's good for Cisco.
Yeah, absolutely. They deserve a congratulations. It's good work.
Yep. This was also RSA week, and we had a virtual RSA again, which I think RSA actually was the last. I shouldn't say again, because RSA was the last event I attended last year before the pandemic started. In fact, I went to RSA.
I remember it well.
Yeah,
I remember it well. February of 2020. Yep.
Yeah, I was supposed to go to the Zoom event the next week, and the Zoom event got made virtual. So, so that's pretty interesting. We've come full circle now.
I remember the RSA. I remember I've never seen so many hand sanitizing stations in my entire life at that conference, and it was the pandemic hadn't really gotten rolling yet in February. It got rolling big time in March. Yeah. But February 25th, when we had that event, nobody was wearing masks yet, but there were just hand sanitizers at every single door of every single webinar. And then that was a red flag for the future. Yeah, it was. And, last year, one of the big themes at RSA was what's called XDR today, which is extended detection response. And although it wasn't, that itself wasn't a big theme, there was lots of things to indicate the continued evolution of XDR. For instance, Palo Alto announced a whole slate of new products to help them introduce zero trust across their network security stack. So they've added SaaS security, advanced URL filtering, DNS security, cloud identity engine, and an ML-based firewall. Cisco also announced a new secure firewall, cloud native firewall built specifically for Kubernetes environments. Cisco also announced some new features for their SecureX platform with some new cloud native endpoint security. And they also announced some updates to their SASE product line with a lot of advanced security capabilities from through Umbrella and Duo and things like that. Fortinet, another network security company, beefed up their EDR, their endpoint detection and response, by adding with the new managed detection and response service. And Fortinet's EDR is a little different than other companies. I know John Madison, their CTO, has said it doesn't rely solely on third-party databases, which he calls, more blunt instruments. Fortinet brings in its own real-time endpoint analysis and network information to block malicious traffic. And so this theme of bringing together the historical silos of endpoint, cloud, and network security, although not explicitly called out from these vendors, I think is alive and kicking. And it has some profound implications for the industry in that I think we're moving into an era where the security platform is actually becoming a real thing. More and more CTOs I talk to and CISOs I talk to tell me they understand now they don't have to have best of breed everywhere to have best in class security. In fact, what they find is if you try and have best of breed everywhere, you have less than best in class security because the ability to keep policies and stuff up to date is very, very difficult, right? That's a very difficult task. And so more of these vendors are trying to roll out these XDR platforms in which they pull in data from all these different sources, use some machine learning analytics on it to predict when threats might happen and help with remediation. And that actually narrows the field down a lot, Chris. It, arguably only Palo Alto, Cisco, and Fortinet can do this. Maybe McAfee can, although they're being broken up now. And so for all the smaller security vendors out there, perhaps VMware can as well. But for all the smaller security vendors out there, it sort of foreshadows an era where they're going to have to either partner with other companies or become part of one of these larger companies' frameworks. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on what's going on in the security world today. No, I think you touched on it. I had not realized that McAfee's being broken up. Why? They're not a monopoly. Who's breaking them up? Well, no, they sold out the consumer division, right? Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of that. So that's your job. Yeah. No, I mean, I think you said it pretty well. You said it real well. Is that, would you consider that maybe the top headline from the RSA event?
I think so. The platforms reign supreme, right? It's very, it's, in fact, I think about the, security. One of the CISOs from one of the large auto manufacturers, I remember interviewing him a couple of years ago, who told me security has never worked. It isn't working, and isn't ever going to work the way it's deployed because there's too many blind spots. And the problem historically has been that it was very difficult for even the best security pro to look through all the data in the SIMs. In fact, it's funny, if you look at all the big breaches that have happened over the last couple of years, or the last 10 years, even going back to Target and stuff, every security management vendor says they caught the breach, right? Well, if that's the case, why'd the breach happen?
Right.
Right. And it's because there's so much noise that your security pro can't determine what's noise and what's real.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's made this possible is the rise of artificial intelligence, right? And so now, while, because somebody described to me once, looking for security threats and all the data is harder than looking for a needle in a haystack. Because it's like looking for a needle in a stack of needles. Yeah. Just one's a little bit shorter than all the other ones. And so, it's a very difficult task. And so I think AI ML has made this possible. And so this is going to come down to, I think, of those, what I think of the big three, Fortinet, Cisco, and Palo Alto, who can actually drive innovation into that area fastest. And they all take a different approach. Fortinet builds all their own stuff. They have their own silicon. Cisco ties to the network. Palo Alto is very heavily acquisition focused, and they all seem to work. It comes down to what flavor customers want.
Yeah. On that, you mentioned the security lapse. Maybe we should mention the news today about this checkpoint research study. It came out today. ZDNet reported on it today about 23 Android apps exposing data for millions of users because of cloud authentication failures. And these are third parties that are not necessarily the cloud service provider, and certainly the user doesn't know about this. It's all in the background. But these researchers analyzed these 23 apps and discovered these serious misconfigurations that could potentially expose data belonging to over 100 million users in Android applications and phones. And Android, of course, has the largest number of phones in the world, way more than iPhone internationally. It said, this Checkpoint research said that no less than 23 popular mobile apps, if you go to the ZDNet homepage, you'll see the story with a link to the study, and I believe the study will tell you which apps they are. The apps are about, one's a taxi getting app, it didn't say which one, a logo maker, screen recorder, a fax service, including that have, and another one called on astrology software. They're leaking data that includes email records, user IDs, passwords, and images. So if you've got an Android phone, you might want to look this up, Checkpoint research, and find out if you've got the app that's leaking. You might be leaking your personal data. And this is all because of third-party misconfigurations. And this is why passwords have got to go away, right? Yeah, we've been pushing for that, for a while. But then, it's interesting. There's been biometric companies that have tried that, right? Apple, uses Face ID, things like that. The issue to me that comes down to is that no matter what we do, in fact, I talked to G2 Patel, the SVP of Security and Apps over at Cisco, about this, because they just came out with passwordless authentication. And I asked him, I said, so is it really passwordless, or is password still the fallback, right? Because if your Face ID doesn't work on your phone, what happens? You put a PIN code in. If your Touch ID doesn't work on your laptop, what happens? You put a password in, right? So we always have password there. And he said he'd love to do that. The problem is compliance departments, the way compliance departments work is they're all based on passwords. So until our compliance and risk officers start rethinking how they're going to do things, we're stuck with passwords for a while. But I agree with you. The whole concept of passwords are archaic. I actually had a conversation with this a few years ago
It's Kevin Mitnick, if you don't think he is.
I know,
right?
I know
Yeah.
him. Yeah.
And so Kevin,
He and I grew up in the same area in LA, the San Fernando Valley.
yeah. Did you go to jail when he did though? So,
No,
and so for those watching, if you're not familiar,
I didn't go to jail. No,
he hacked the FBI. He was very successul at doing it.
he invited the FBI to try to find him.
Yeah.
It's legendary. Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry.
So all he does today is penetration testing. And he said the number one way for him to penetrate companies. So for 90% of companies that hire him, he can breach within an hour. And 90% of the time, or I think it's something like that, it's through passwords in cloud apps. And once you have one of them, users tend to use the same passwords as some variant of it in all their applications, right? And so we live in this world now where applications aren't really built by, that you don't have app developers the way we used to. What they do is they cobble together microservices from all these different service providers, which is what this Checkpoint study showed. And I think that's, while it's made app development faster, right, obviously there's huge risk to that. And so I don't really know what advice you give people anymore. Keep your passwords secure. Like, you got to rely on the app provider to have some semblance, other than continually, I suppose if you use like any kind of multi-factor authentication, that would help that, because then you go to a very simple password, but then you have a text message push. So, there probably needs to be more of that. So
yeah, I have an Android phone and I use my fingerprint every single time I use it.
Yeah, but there's still a password in there somewhere, right, in the back end.
I don't put a password in. What they do is they give you, you can use your finger or one of your fingers for a fingerprint, or it'll recognize your face, or there's a little, like a pattern, like a tic-tac-toe pattern that you can program in. If you want to do like a Z or an IT, you can do that too, but you have to do it on the phone. There's no password. So I don't know. They're trying different ways to get around the password.
I think one of the best biometrics too is keyboard cadence, and that's not really that popular yet. But I was talking with one of the big security companies. They were saying that everybody's like, you could make your password, but the way you type password is different than the way I type password.
True.
And so that keyboard cadence actually can be used as that second level of multi-factor authentication without really bothering the user, right? So that would be one way around.
I wonder if that does slow up the phone. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. But if your data doesn't get stolen, then maybe it's worth it. So
it's probably worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the last thing we wanted to touch on was it comes off this this article I had written on an interview I did with Rajiv Shah, the CEO of Soluna Networks, who's a private 5G company, and they had started using the term this week called the edgeless enterprise. And I asked Rajiv, I said, that's an interesting term, because all I hear about is edge. Right? Every conference I go to, I hear about edge.
Right.
And now you're coming with edgeless. And so you, in our prep for this, you had sort of joked that said the edge was here for about 5 minutes. Right now it's gone. and I think there's two ways to look at it. One is the edge is everywhere, or the edge is nowhere, right? And they're both the different sides of the same coin. Yeah. But the concept is that we have IoT devices now. We have edge computing. We have them connected over 5G. We have workers at home. We have workers in branch offices. Right. So our edge is now highly diffuse, and in a lot of those cases, the connectivity tends to be very, even the workloads tend to be very ephemeral. So if I'm spinning up a workload on in a container on an edge box, or I'm going to working at home, it's not a permanent connection. And so I need to be able to deliver network and security services with the same level of agility as my apps are spun up and things like that. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And the premise of the interview with Soluna was they've actually built their whole product using cloud native principles, so you can spin up even pieces of their solution very, very quickly. But I think this is a big kind of next step for the network industry, is to move not just to cloud managed, but truly cloud native networking. Yeah.
Well, some people are going to say, it's just market speak. It's just a new, it's a new thing to try to sell. Well, like server and serverless, those are real things. You either have a server or you don't. And if you're using it in the cloud, well, it's there, but it's not your server, that kind of thing. Edge and edgeless, I tend to think that that the edgeless concept could be a legitimate thing. I think that you're right. The edge is kind of what we say it is, whether it's your laptop or your phone, or if you're in Alaska, and you got a tablet and you're connecting to the internet. Is that an edge thing? Well, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's all part of the corporate network.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think the edgeless idea just means it's just the diffused edge. It's how the edge that we know today, or we think of today, is kind of dissolving. Because computing is everywhere, and to stay connected is super important, and to stay connected with a lot of power is super important, because more and more of the apps we're using are using heavier software with AI and machine learning in it, and those have to be played. They can't be in a weak power environment. They have to have good computing wherever they exist. So
yeah. All right, Chris. Well, this brings us to the end of this week's ZKast.
Bad.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of stuff going on this week, and so
we were just getting going.
Yeah. Well, we can continue it next week. So, anyways, on behalf of Chris, I'm ZS Caravello from ZK Reach, and I'll see you guys next week.